Welcome in everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Lenawee by Visit Lenawee. I'm the Director of Marketing for Lenawee, Jenna Salazar, and I'm so excited to be in a very historic place here in Lenawee County today. There's a lot here to talk about, but we have Amy Vandell here with us. She's a tour guide for Cambridge Junction State Park and the Walker Tavern. Welcome in. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we're so excited. There's so much to talk about. I feel like you could just be here for hours and hours just learning. But let's start from the very beginning. We're here along US 12.
Yes.
Right now we're sitting in the original Walker Tavern.
Correct.
Tell us about the history of this land before this was even built. There was some history here.
Yes, there was. The history of the Junction goes way back to Indians using them as trails. We didn't come up with US 12 as a route. Actually, we followed the Indian Trail. And even before that, there were prehistoric animals that traveled along these same routes.
Really?
The trail became a military road in the 1820s between Fort Wayne in Detroit and Fort Dearborn in Chicago. And it took quite a bit to make that happen. It had to be cleared. This was all pretty much virgin forest. And they were trying to make a road at least 4 soldiers wide so that they could, march that wide.
Wow.
After that, it became the stagecoach route between Detroit and Chicago with several stops along the way. The Walker Tavern was one of those stops, and Wayside Inn for people to stay overnight, have meals, rest, and then go on their travels.
And at that time, what year was it that this was built? And talk to us about the family that purchased the land, how much they bought it for, because I thought that was interesting too. And then when they turned it into the vision they had here.
Okay. Originally, there was a treaty of 1907 with the Potawatomi Indians that allowed the United States government to start selling land for $1.25 an acre. And this created quite a migration from both the New England and New York area because the Erie Canal was finished in 1825. That made transportation easier to get all the way to Lake Erie, cross Lake Erie, and go to either Detroit, Toledo, or Monroe, and head west for that, that inexpensive land. Mr. Calvin Snell built this tavern. It wasn't called the Walker Tavern then because he sold it to the Walkers, but he built this tavern in 1832. In 1835, he built a hotel in Tecumseh, one of the first cities in Lenawee County. And he sold this to the Walkers, who came from Cooperstown, New York, along that route that I mentioned, the Erie Canal. And they were innkeepers in New York, so they purchased this and turned it into a wayside tavern for the stagecoach that was running at that time. There were 2 stages that passed this tavern each day. And then eventually, the Walkers did so well between 1843, when they opened this as their tavern, to 1853, they built the brick Walker Tavern, the 3-story structure across the street.
Across the street here, yeah.
And they lived here.
Okay, so then they turned this into their house.
And they turned this into their house.
But before that, when it was the tavern, tell us about some of the offerings they had and the room space that they had, what people would pay to stay here, what they would do, especially behind us and in this room.
Okay. Well, in this room, we're in the bar room, and this room would be where the gentlemen off the stage would gather. They would talk politics. This table talks about the politics of the day, the issues, the parties, including the Whigs, some of the famous people that belonged to those parties at the time. They might smoke clay pipes, drink hard cider, which was likely the beverage of the day. And across the way was a parlor for the ladies, and this was a traditional tavern style at the time because the ladies would usually not come into the bar room with the gentlemen. They would meet with the other ladies and have tea and discuss, their ideas and find out from their traveling companions where they were headed and what they were doing. Upstairs was a big open area and also 2 rooms There were many beds up there, but there were no bathrooms. Except this did not have running water or electricity.
Yeah.
So there were chamber pots. Sometimes people would hang blankets between the beds to create some sense of privacy. Beds were 50 cents to sleep overnight, and meals were 25 cents. But when you look at an acre of land for $1.25, 75 cents to sleep and eat sounds kind of like a lot of money. So often even strangers would share a bed. That's known between the different stagecoach, stops that people could do that because they could save 25 cents. That means an extra meal maybe.
Interesting.
And downstairs, the next room over from the bar room, is the kitchen dining area with a very old iron stove, cast iron stove from Erie, Pennsylvania. It's called Faithful Number 9. And that's what they would use to cook, to bake, to make their coffee and tea, and serve the people who were staying over.
Wow.
They did have 220 acres of land that was farmed there as well, the Walkers, that is, as they kept building. And they would eat a lot of pork, apples, vegetables that they grew themselves, and fish that could have been caught locally.
Okay.
They had eggs. They learned about corn from the Indians and did eat corn, called maize by the Indians.
Wow.
And there are some reviews that the food was good and the beds were clean, which is not the case for all stagecoaches.
Yeah.
Stagecoach stops.
So interesting. So the stove that's in that room that we looked at is the original.
I don't know if it's original, but I do know that it was in pictures when Mr. Hewitt, the family that ended up making sure that this place was preserved for generations to see. They're in early pictures when he bought this tavern in 1921. He bought both of the taverns in 1921, and he renovated this one, which had been used as the residence of the stagecoach driver's family, Francis Dewey, for many years after the Walkers sold this to him, and he created his antique business in the tavern, the Brick Walker Tavern.
Okay.
He also opened for overnight guests and meals over there.
Yeah.
And so he kind of revived it to its old glory, and this was created to be more of a museum to the original stagecoach stop that it was.
Wow, so amazing. We were talking about the kitchen area, and you showed me this when we were in there and asked me and Robert here what we thought it was. I said a board game because of the back, which was way off.
Like dominoes or something, yeah.
Robert said a hot plate, but then you had me smell it, and I just couldn't still pinpoint it, but it was how tea was packaged.
It is.
And how they used it.
It has a beautiful, oriental picture on it of some place with trees and columns, and it has writing, obviously, in Chinese or some Asian script. And it's very beautifully made, and it is pressed black tea. And this is how tea was purchased and shipped from Asia in the day. It wasn't in big bags of loose, fluffy tea or in tea bags. They made it into a brick, so this is about 5 pounds at least of tea that can be very economically shipped and also not get moldy and things like that in that long travel. So they'd have to chip off a piece and boil it in the water and make tea that way.
Wow. There's so many cool artifacts here. And stories, even what you were telling me, like we could go on and on, but one of them that you were talking about was the escape of John White.
Yes.
A glimpse into that story and the significance of it in this building.
Well, in this building, we do recognize that this area had a lot of people who were abolitionists. Laura Haviland and her family and other farmers in the area supported the abolition of slavery. And they did that not just, in their speech or thoughts, but realistically, because people, even between the 1850s and 1860, there was several African American, either free or self-emancipated slaves that had made their way here and were working on farms and working for people, and those people wanted to make sure that, they were safe. So the story of John White is about one such man who was from Kentucky. He was self-emancipated, and he was working for Royal Watkins. Mr. Watkins had a farm, and he was very happy with John White was working for him, and he got word through Laura Haviland from someone who came to visit her school, which was the Raisin Institute, that there were some people in town, and one of them was a lawyer, and the other people were asking about an African-American man working in the area. And so she sent word first by a schoolboy running, and then on horseback to tell Royal Watkins that they may be coming for John White. So Mr. Watkins was able to put him on a train and send him to Canada.
Wow. Just so much here. I wanted to talk about too that when people come and visit, what can they see, what can they do while they're here walking through?
Well, they can kind of get the feeling that they're stepping back in time. And a lot of people that come are from this area, and they can actually kind of think back generations that this is what their relatives, did. They came here, they found land. In fact, there's a map of Lenawee County, excuse me, with the 20 townships. By 1857, almost all of those plots of land have been filled in with names, and some people look for names of people and have found names. It's like, oh yeah, that's my neighbor's name. But it's really somebody who bought that property before 1857 that was their relative who started their homestead there. So there's that, and then there's also just thinking of how we live compared to how they lived.
Yes.
How hard it was to do everything from making tea to, cooking, getting water from a well, cleaning up at a dry sink, preserving food. There is a Michigan cellar under this tavern that I'm sure was used to store, foods and vegetables and things like that.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm kind of going back now, but like from when the Walkers owned this, and then when did it become a state park? And at that time you were talking about how some archaeologists actually looked through the land and found something interesting.
Yeah. I think they found several things, and there's some things that are here, including an 1844 mercury dollar that was a coin at the time. And it's interesting also, their local banks at that time were creating their own money. There was the Merchants Bank of Jackson, which Mr. Walker was the president of for a time.
Oh, wow.
And there's a picture on the wall here talking about them, that they had a $3 bill at that time, which is kind of an interesting denomination. But those banks, basically that tender was only good within the local community. It was not, you couldn't go and spend that probably even in Detroit. Anyway, for several years the Walkers ran the Brick Walker Tavern and lived here, and in 1865 they sold this original tavern. They weren't living here anymore. They sold it to Francis Dewey, who was a stagecoach driver.
Okay.
And the stagecoach driver and his families of many generations lived here until the heir at that time of the Dewey family sold this in 1921 to Frederick Hewitt and his wife Edna, and they became the new tavern owners. And there's a picture that kind of depicts all the different caretakers from 1832 till now. And he opened it as a museum for people to visit, along with the other tavern, as I mentioned, as an antor. And his daughter, Jean Hewitt Keith, lived on the property. She had a house built that was kind of between the barn and the tavern, and she lived there, and she made it in her will that this property would be preserved and be available, because she knew how much her father had loved the tavern and bringing it back to its glory. So in 1965, this property became property of the state of Michigan, and they began renovating it to open it for a state park as a historic site.
Wow. What type
Wayne
of
State University did the archaeological dig for a couple years around here at the tavern and at the historic barn.
What type of items did they find that people can see
They found
here?
things like pottery pieces that we have here. Some very old glass, some oyster shells and bones and things like that are reminiscent of, obviously what they ate. They found that coin, some things like nails and utensils and tools, things like that. There are some pieces here, and there are more pieces that are at the museum, the History Museum in Lansing.
Okay, wow. A lot here. So this is open seasonally.
It is.
What are the seasonal hours and days people can come out and tour?
It's open from Memorial Day, after Memorial Day, because we're actually closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, so we're not open on actual holidays.
Okay.
From Wednesday through Sunday.
Okay.
So that's the best time when people are in all the campgrounds around here, and if they want to come over, that's great. So, and open until the end of September.
Okay.
So Memorial Day to the end of September, and during that time, special events that happen as well. We have a wonderful group called the Friends of Walker Tavern, which is a volunteer group, and many of those folks help out with things like the farmers market that we have every Sunday, and also groups that come from schools for field trips. Many of them are retired teachers, and they just love to have that opportunity to share history with the kids, and they do lots of hands-on things that kids did in the day, and that seems to be something that they all enjoy.
Yeah.
We also have historic baseball here a couple times a year with other teams, sometimes from Greenfield Village or other cities around.
People can come and sit and watch them right in the park, right?
Yep, and it's all free.
Wow.
And we have some concerts. One group that comes every year is called the Jacktown Ukes, and they've been around for many, many years. There are about 14 or 15 members that play ukuleles and kazoos and things like that, and sing old-time songs.
Yeah.
It's always a good turnout.
Okay. How do people get more information about those events that are happening?
Those events, it's probably best to go to the Friends of Walker Tavern.
Okay.
If you Google that or go to their Facebook page, they keep up really well with everything that's coming up, and also pictures of things that have happened, so that you can also see.
Okay,
But
great.
you can also go as far as for Cambridge Junction, which is where the Walker Tavern is listed. Or if you do Historic Walker Tavern, it will come up with probably a couple of different sites that talk about it in connection with the History Center, the Michigan History Center, and because that's what it's actually part of.
Okay, great. So other than looking up the events, getting those on your calendar when they're open seasonally, May through September, on those days that you're open and running, people can just stop in whenever they want, right?
10 to 5, because we're open for tours, and the whole grounds encompass 80 acres.
Wow.
We have picnic facilities, we have handicapped picnic facilities, we have, people love to come and just walk their dogs. There's no camping or anything here, but we do have that, and there's some trails that lead around the property.
Great,
So
yeah.
that's great too. We have some regulars who come and run.
Lots to see. And there's typically a tour guide on hand right here.
Yes, Wednesdays through Sundays from 10 to 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whoever is on staff can walk you through all the interesting stories and artifacts, like the tea, things that we probably wouldn't pick up on just walking through it by ourselves. But
and it's also, there's very many things that are self-explanatory, a lot of things on the walls, and that people can read and do a self-tour as well.
yeah, it's just so cool to see the history right here in Lenawee being preserved like this, and be able to walk through. And like you said, you just feel like you are literally stepping back in time, seeing everything. So if you guys are history buffs or not, I really think you guys will enjoy coming through the Walker Tavern here at the Cambridge Junction State Park. A reminder again, it opens May 1st.
I would say Memorial Day for regular tours start after Memorial Day, Wednesdays through Sundays, all the way through the end of September.
Okay, great. So plan your trip, and if you're in the area and looking for lodging, make sure to go to visitlenawee.com for all your accommodations, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.